Hey guys, thanks for joining me, and if you like what you see, please subscribe.
Hello, welcome to Sharp Ends. Recently I got a Deka Hogue In Magnacut, which is a super steel and is an awesome knife. It only cost $136. The other example of a bar lock that was an ultralight type knife was the Benchmade Bug Out. Now this one is wearing a fancy set of titanium scales. It originally came in Grivory, which is really bendy. The titanium scales on this really don't add that much weight to it, and it makes it a much nicer knife to use. However, this costs a lot of money. Also, it's comes in 30V, S30V, which is a fine knife steel, but is nothing compared to Magnacut. So this knife I unboxed, and immediately I could tell that its action was really poor, and also it has some sharp edges right here on the inside. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open this up and maintain it and hopefully make the action better. One thing I will say though is that I accidentally washed this knife like 2 days after I got it, and the action actually got better, surprisingly. It was really kind of grindy, and it was hard to flick out, and it still doesn't drop shut really at all. This knife I've maintained and, drop shut really nicely. That's what a bar lock should do. So I found it interesting that just by washing it, suddenly the action got a little bit better. That was an accident. However, it's still not dropping shut, and so I'm going to do a couple of things. I'm going to polish the washers on it, and I'm going to take this sharp edge off around here, and I'm going to do disassembly and show you guys what's inside. So first step is going to be to take it apart. This is I've already checked it. It's T8 all around on the hardware. So I'm going to open this up and try not to lose the bar springs or anything like that. I assume that this is put together fairly much like the Bug Out, but I don't know that for sure. So I'm going to take the pivot out first. The pivot is locking apparently, so that's good. It has a lot of the Loctite on the nut in here, which, since it's been washed, seems a little wet. So I like to lay this out. When I take things apart, I like to lay it out in a certain order, and that order is I put the pivot to the left, and then I take the screws and I put them in order of how I took them out. Maintaining your knife and taking things apart is half the joy of having a new knife, I think, and making them run better. Now, I don't blame, for $136, I do not blame Hogue for this action not being good, or for some of the details like the scales being a little sharp on the inside edges. That's just what you're going to get for that price point. So, it's just something you're going to have to deal with. The spacers on these are black, which I like. And this should just come off now. It just stuck on this last barrel. There we go. So you can see in here, it's milled out a little bit. It's got some reinforcing bars of plastic in here. But this is very lightweight and cheap material. I could easily see them making titanium replacement scales for this, and this being an even better knife. But then again, you're getting away from a knife being super affordable and cheap. So the liners here are not complete. They just are these little things. And that's the way that the Bug Out is built too, with the little liners. So I'm going to disengage this Omega spring like that. And now I am going to start taking apart the other side, I think, to take off the other part of these scales. I should only have to take out this spacer here because these are no longer attached to the other side. And then I'm going to finally push out the pivot bolt. So this is the first one back, so I'm going to put it right next to this guy here to show that it's on the other side. I am curious about how I'm going to take apart, if I'm going to take apart the bar lock itself. We'll see. Get something to push out this pivot bolt. And you can see the pivot bolt is locked in here with a D cut into it. And maybe instead of pushing, I just kind of pull the whole assembly off. There we go. Okay, there's the pivot. That'll all need to be cleaned. And here are the washers, and you can see it still has some moisture on it from when I washed it. And that was probably what made it the action smoother. This assembly in here, I'm going to try to clean out as best as I can, but I'm not going to take it all the way apart. I'm going to leave the Omega springs and the bar lock intact, and then I'm just going to do a good job of greasing it. So I'm going to now take some alcohol and start cleaning this off. This is just isopropyl alcohol and some Q-tips, and Q-tips are good for getting inside here. Got some lint from my clothing in the washing machine in here. You can see all the gunk I'm pulling out. And I'm going to clean out the pivot holes really well. This assembly is now kind of springing in right here where the everything goes in. So it kind of clamps itself into the blade and everything. And so what that means is that I think I could get this apart. There's just this back spacer here, but I'm not going to. I'm just going to keep this kind of assembled the way it is. I'm not going to make extra work for myself. And I think I'm going to have perfect access. Oh, look. So then the Omega spring I pulled back and it came down into this little slot. So now actually that's really cool. I don't know if that's a design feature or what that is for, but I was able to just pull the Omega spring back into this notched area here, which allows me to then get inside this racetrack where the bar lock is and really clean it out nicely. And it also allows me to get the other faces of the bar lock. Yeah, cool. All right, so I'm going to call that clean for now, and I'm going to do my oiling later when I start putting things back together. I'm going to clean off the pivot really nicely with alcohol and get some of this old Loctite out of here. And like that. All right. So one thing I want to do now is I want to take these washers and I want to clean them off. You can see that they're kind of gunked up here. And I want to clean out the inside of the pivot and the top part where the lock bar goes. I'm going to take that washer off and clean under here. Look at how dirty that is. So that's just grease acting with the water and stuff like that, but I think that it was some grime in there too before it got washed as well. So this is all material that needs to remove. You can also see where the washers have been running against the side of the knife. On this area here, it's much more shiny, and that's where a lot of the tension was, or a lot of the compression was on it and grinding away at that metal and making it a little bit smoother. So when this is properly greased up, this should be good. So the next thing I'm going to do is these phosphor bronze washers are good, but they're not polished necessarily, and I'm going to go ahead and not take too much material away from them, but what I am going to do is make them just a little bit smoother, so that they, hopefully when we put this together, it will then drop shut with a combination of new grease and a little bit of TLC on the washers. How am I going to do that? Well, I'm going to take an Arkansas stone. You could do this other ways as well. I'm going to take a little Arkansas stone here, and I'm going to put a little of food grade mineral oil on this stone. This is a stone that I use for my KME sharpener. This usually goes inside of the holder so that I can then fixed angle sharpening system so that I can really get it nice and sharp. And that the Arkansas stone is what I use to kind of put on the final polish before I strop. So I'm just going to take the washer here, and then I'm going to lightly move it around here for about 30 seconds on each side. And you can already see there's the mineral oil is already starting to get a little bit black over here, and that's me just polishing it. Take a look on the other side. I don't think this is going to need much, and I don't want to remove too much material either. I just kind of want to polish it a little bit. This basically, I believe the Arkansas stone is somewhere, like if you actually put a grit to it, like a sandpaper grit to it, I think that it comes out at around 6,000. So a very fine thing. And I'm just cleaning off this washer now. And I'm just going to do a little bit more. And cleaning it off on my rag over here. Now I'm going to take this one and do the same thing. I'm not paying attention to which washer goes on which side of the knife. This knife is so new and put together that it's not like it's worn these in a particular manner where it would matter which side of the washer was on the outside and which was on the inside. Some more expensive knives, I do pay attention to that kind of detail, and I keep the washers on the same side, facing the same part of the blade and all like that, but I don't think it's really going to matter for this. And you can see on the grease here that it's starting to turn a little black from the material I moved. All right. And I think that that's all I'm going to do for that. So I'm going to put the Arkansas stone away. I'm going to take a little bit more alcohol now, and I'm going to clean up these bearings a little bit more and see. So the parts that were proud on these bearings got more material removed than the other ones, and that is okay, because that means that those parts that were proud, that were running against it, are now a little bit more down. And by that I mean, you see the outside of this washer here is more shiny than the inside. That means that that outside part was standing more proud and therefore causing more friction. And now that I removed it, it should be more even. And this one, it's the opposite. On the other side of this bearing, it's the opposite. The inside of the washer is now a little bit more shiny. So overall, this should run more smoothly. At least that's my theory. I don't want to remove more than this and try to get like a clean shine on the whole thing. I just want to remove a little bit of the proudness of the washers that were grinding a little bit, and I think the rest should work out fine. All right, so now we're going to start putting this back together, and I'm going to be using knife pivot lube. I have the heavy and the ultralight stuff. The heavy stuff I'm going to put on the more of the mechanical areas, and the light I'm going to put on the washers and the pivot. So this is the heavy, and I'm going to put just a little bit in here on the racetrack where the pivot goes, where the, I'm sorry, not the pivot, where the bar lock goes. Hello. Oil, come out of your needle. There you go. So this is much more viscous. It stays on the surface areas you put it there because it's kind of a thicker coat. And now I'm going to put the lock pivot back up in its racetrack and move this around so that it gets in there. Yeah, there we go. I can already feel a difference in how that action is working out. All right, so this is going to be the tricky part, is putting the pivot back on with the washers in the right, getting it through the pivot and seated correctly. So I'm going to take a little bit of the light pivot oil, and this is a face-to-face contact where it always is touching. So this is where I'm going to use the light stuff. And I'm going to put some there and some inside the pivot hole, and then put on a washer. And I'm going to put a little bit of the pivot oil on the top of the washer, and this will stay stuck to the side of the blade now that it has that oil between it. Don't want to use too much, but it always seems that you end up putting a little bit too much on there. It really doesn't need that much, but I also say that this blade is super sharp. So I know that some people like to put tape around the edge to be super careful that they are not going to cut themselves accidentally. It's never happened to me, I say, right before I cut myself, I'm sure. I'm kind of pinching the washers here onto the blade and trying to get it back in here. And this is where I have to be careful because lining these holes all up in the right way is going to be difficult, because the washers, now that they're greased especially, aren't going to necessarily want to go where they're supposed to go. That's why we're going to take a little pokey tool, in this case a little screwdriver, Torx screwdriver, and line up the holes as best as I can. All right, so that's good. And now I have to, okay, so I'm doing this backwards. Yeah. Okay, so the nut is going to go on that side. This is the show side, so the show side needs to go on first because that's where the flat part of the pivot bolt is going to want to rest. There's a little bit of grease here, or rather a little bit of the blue gunk, the Loctite, from removing the screw on this side, so I'm going to clean that off. Oh, I forgot one other little thing I wanted to do. I want to remove a little bit of material from the inside edge here because it's a little sharp. So I'm going to take a little piece of fine sandpaper, and this part right here is sharp. Now it doesn't, your fingers aren't on there, but you can feel it, and I figured while this was open, I'm just going to go ahead and take a little bit of this off. So I don't want to do this over everything that I just cleaned. I'm going to move this aside, but I still want it to be on camera, so I'm just going to try to do it over here. Yeah, and I'm just going to take the corner off, the sharp corner off here, and it doesn't need much sanding at all. It just needs a little, yeah, that's already feeling 10 bazillion times better. All right. Because when you're pinching really tight on a knife, even though these are in the inside of the knife, your skin kind of folds inside that, and you can feel it as you grip tight. So this is going to make it more pleasurable to hold. All right. So I'm just going through, feeling it with my finger until I get about the right consistency. All right, so there's that side. I'm going to go ahead and do this side while I'm at it. Seems like a good time to tell a dad joke. So when does a joke become a dad joke? When does a joke become a dad joke? When it's apparent. Yep, that was your bad joke for the day, and you can pretend like it was yours and that you didn't hear it on YouTube. I didn't take off these back spacers here, so I'm being careful because I don't want to scratch them with a sandpaper, so I'm just being extra careful not to run the sandpaper on these back spacers. Another good thing about this Deka Hogue is that it's ambidextrous. It has, because it's a bar lock, and they've put screw holes for the left-hand carry. This is totally ambidextrous knife, which is great. All right, cool. So now I have that done. I'm going to put this on the show side scale and get it in there. And then I need to put, if I don't put the scale on first, then the pivot is going to not be on the outside of the knife, which is bad. So this is where it gets tricky to try to line all of this up. So I need to hold this, align the D part of this before I put it in there, even though I've put oil, I'm just gonna put a little bit more oil on the inside pivot part there so that when the pivot goes in, it will then be resting, or it'll be up against some grease. And now it's not wanting to go all the way through, and that's because I need to line up the washers and the knife all at once to get it to go in. And this is where I'm probably going to be cursing a little bit. So if I can kind of arrange things, we hope. And I got it. All right, I felt it finally seat. So now it is in there. Cool, cool. All right, so now we're going to take a little bit of some Loctite, and I'm going to take my little gear sprocket tool from my watch kit, and I'm gonna put some on the tip of this, and I'm gonna put that inside here. And then I'm gonna take a little bit more, and I'm gonna put it inside the spacers as well. I prefer to put it on the inside of the thread than on the actual screws themselves. It's a little trick I learned actually from reading the facts sheet on, or maybe it was a maintenance tab on Three Rivers Manufacturing, who also makes a great bar lock. And that would be for the shadow. And I'm being super careful to keep this all lined up, but I want to put a little bit on this other side of this spacer here. Okay. Now we can put the show side scale on, or rather the clip side. I'm going to put all the screws in, but not tighten them up all the way. I'm gonna go until it's almost tight, and then once I have them all 99% tight, I'm going to stop and then test it, and then tighten, continue to tighten. All right, so that's that one. Then I flip it over, and because I've kept these all in order, I know which way they go. The ones all the way to the left are closest to the pivot. And yeah, I'm excited to see if this action has improved and if I can get it to drop shut now and still be tight with no kind of blade play. See, it's always a balancing act to get the final tuning in. Here we go, last one. None of these are fully tightened down yet, so I'm gonna have to go back through and do my final little tightening of these. Good, good. I'm gonna check the tension on all these. They're not completely tight yet. And then what I'm gonna wanna do is after I get it kind of in there, and now all the back spacer screws are in there 99% of the way, I'm gonna tighten down on the pivot all the way until it gets tight, and then back off about 3/4 of a turn and see how that feels. Oh, it's dropping shut. All right, and now I'm going to go ahead and finish tightening up the spacer screws. I look at the knife centering of this is perfect. And going to tighten up the pivot just a little bit. All right, so that's just a little bit tight. No blade play there. I'm going to back off the pivot just a little bit. Not quite dropping shut. Oh, well, yeah, it is. And now can I open it? So when I first got it, I couldn't deploy it at all with the lock bar like this. I couldn't do that. So now it's doing that, which is great. All right, and blade play. There is no blade play. The plastic scales have a little play in them still, but that's just because they're plastic scales. I'm going to make sure that all of the spacers are nice and tight. Even the side that I didn't touch. And I'm just going to try tightening the pivot just a smidge more. See how it... I don't mind it being just a hair too tight on the pivot. It's still dropping shut because the washers will continue to break in. The oil will continue to penetrate the washers and the blade and get spread around on surfaces I might have missed. So now it needs to open and close a lot. All right, and now so when I hold a knife right up here on the jimping or on the back here, before my thumb was getting on the inside of the scales and I was feeling a really sharp edge, and now I don't. That is gone. So my impressions of this Deka is that it's a super sweet deal. It's a blade that is fairly inexpensive, and Magnacut steel is almost totally stainless, even though not technically stainless because it doesn't have enough of the chemicals that technically make a stainless steel stainless. But you can look up the research and everything about how Magnacut is made. Laren Thomas has a site, Knife Steel Nerds, if you want to learn more about Magnacut. So there you go. I like this a lot. This feels so much smoother. It's dropping shut now, and I can deploy it with a lock bar. So you can spend $200 or over $200, and if you're getting titanium scales, you can, close to $300 on your bug out with a less nice steel, or you can spend $136. Plastic scales, that's sure, but the blade steel's a lot nicer. The grind on this is great. It came razor sharp. I'm a big fan of this. The only knocks that I still have with this are that the actual heads of the lock bar, these are a little sharp, and the thumb studs are a little sharp, but I flick open and I use my nail when I do that, so that doesn't matter, and I have really big calluses, so I don't really care about the lock bar being too sharp. All right, well, thank you so much for joining me on Sharp Ends. If you have any questions about this assembly or what I've done, or have any tips or tricks that I missed or didn't explain, please leave a comment below. I'd appreciate it. And if you liked what you see, please tell someone. And if you didn't like what you see, please tell an enemy. But please tell someone. And I will see you guys next time on Sharp Ends.